Thank you, Jennifer. Well, hello, everybody. It's reflected before we came into the briefing studio this afternoon that this is the first briefing about being on the surface of the moon for the first time in about 52 years in this room. So that's quite incredible, and it's a pleasure to be here. Intuitive Machines, Odysseus lander landed yesterday at 5:24 Central Time. We did have a stable, controlled landing and a safe, soft touchdown. I'll give you a little bit of description today about the state of Odysseus, or Odie, and its attitude on the surface and what you can expect from it over the coming days. It's pretty incredible. It was quite a spicy 7-day mission to get to the moon. And I'll give you some fun facts about how far we've traveled and how fast we've gone. So just to begin with, the vehicle is stable near or at our intended landing site. We do have communications with the lander. It's from the larger radio astronomy dishes around the world that are part of our lunar telemetry network, and to the spacecraft from several of the antennas and 2 of the radios. So that's phenomenal to begin with. So we're beginning to, now that we're on the Goonhilly dish in the United Kingdom, we're downloading and downloading data from the buffers in the spacecraft and commanding the spacecraft and trying to get you surface photos, because I know that everyone's hungry for those surface photos. But we got some interesting data that gives us a position, an attitude of where the lander is, and I'll explain that in a moment. We have the sun impinging on the solar arrays and charging our batteries. We are providing power to the spacecraft, and we're at 100% state of charge. That's fantastic. I talked to you about the communications, and we will be taking an image, hopefully this weekend, from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter to find the lander and pinpoint its location in the South Pole region of the moon. If you can go to the photo here that we have, this is a photo that I thought you'd find interesting that we'll release to the public here. Here we're flying about 10 kilometers over the surface of Schamberger Crater near the South Pole region of the moon. We're still about 200 kilometers uprange from where our intended landing site is. But here we have one of our public affairs cameras taking this beautiful image, and you see how shadowed and undulating the terrain is, and that's important to understand how difficult it is to land on the surface of the moon. So thanks for that image. Going back, I could say that it was quite phenomenal that, if you think about it, we were traveling 25,000 miles an hour, and we came down and touched down at about 6 miles an hour with a downrange traverse of about 2 miles an hour. That's walking speed. So that's kind of just an interesting metric for you. We traveled 2.5 times the distance to the lunar surface. That's about 600,000 miles due to the trajectory and the number of orbits that we've gone through. In doing that and in performing that incredible deceleration, our first-of-a-kind liquid oxygen, liquid methane, additively manufactured 3D printed engine burned 6 times for a cumulative burn time of over 20 minutes. It's just an incredible performing machine, and we're really proud to take that technology to a TRL level 9. I got to say something about the team. The ops teams were cool under pressure for the whole 7 days. It was quite amazing to see them in work, real space cowboys. And we worked through all the difficulties. If you think back from Apollo days, there wasn't one mission that went absolutely perfectly. So you have to be adaptable, you have to be innovative, and you have to persevere. And we persevered right up until the last moments to get this soft touchdown like we wanted to. Let me just talk briefly about attitude on the surface. This is a little lander. I'm going to pretend that's the rock that the lander's leaning on. We think we came down with, like I said, about 6 miles an hour this way and about 2 miles an hour this way, and caught a foot in the surface, and the lander has tipped like this. And we believe this is the orientation of the lander on the moon. We're getting sun moving this way around the lander, so the solar arrays are being powered, and we believe a little later we'll get solar sun on the top deck solar array. The majority of our payloads are all in view, and we are collecting science, and we've collected science along the way to the moon, and I've been downloading that data. In particular, 3 payloads that are positioned on the lander, they have been operationally used in this mission. The LN1 payload out of Marshall Space Flight Center, we actually assisted us in determining our precise location in space, orbit determination we call it, using a Doppler measurement. That was very useful, and as it was part of the Deep Space Network, it augmented our communications from our own commercial network. The other one you've heard about was the NASA Doppler LiDAR from Langley Research Center, and we integrated their telemetry stream into our navigation application, and we use that for our power descent initiation. And then finally, the one that was very useful was a new technology out of Glenn Research Center, and that was the radio frequency mass gauging. And that instrument really gave us an understanding of what the propellant tank levels were, which helped us budget the amount of propellant to take us all the way safely to the surface of the moon. So very interesting mission so far. As we get more telemetry and turn more things on, we'll be updating you over the coming days of the analysis and the reconstruction of the landing. Tim can comment on that a little bit today, on how we did the power descent all the way to the surface and why we believe in the data that I'm talking to you about today. Yesterday, we thought, just to clear up some confusion, we thought we were upright. And the reason was that the tanks were reading, this is the X direction, and the tanks were reading gravity on the moon. At the fill levels, there were still residuals in the tank, and we saw those measurements in the X direction. Well, that was stale telemetry, so when we worked through the night to get other telemetry down, we noticed that in the Z direction, this direction, is where we're seeing the residual tank quantities. And so that's what tells us with fairly certain terms the orientation of the vehicle. And hopefully we'll get a picture here this weekend and share it with you. Nilofer, that's all I have.
Thank you so much, Steve. Next up, we have Joel Kearns. Joel?
Hey, thank you, Nilofer. First, let me congratulate Intuitive Machines for 3 major accomplishments. The first, as Steve said, is for having the first successful soft landing on the moon by the United States since 1972. The second is for being the first non-government commercial organization to actually touch down safely on the surface of the moon. And the third is for having a touchdown point 80 degrees south latitude, much closer to the south pole of the moon than any earlier U.S. robotic or human explorers. Let me give you some of the context for the importance of Intuitive Machines' accomplishment on their mission. In 2017, the nation charged NASA to expand our scientific and technical work in the area of the moon, science, technology, and human explorers under our Artemis initiative. As part of that, NASA went down the path to listen to what industry had been telling us for some years, which is that for robotic landing services, that we should be able to purchase that from U.S. industry instead of doing it ourselves at NASA for robotic systems. Now, NASA is very good at building and operating robotic probes throughout the solar system, but we knew we'd be going back to the moon repeatedly to do science and technical studies and eventually human exploration. So we put into place this Commercial Lunar Payload Services Initiative, or CLPS, to buy, in effect, the service to bring NASA cargo down to the surface of the moon and have the data from those experiments brought back to Earth by industry. Intuitive Machines is one of the participants in that initiative that's now been awarded 3 service contracts to bring NASA equipment, experiments, and cargo down to the surface of the moon. And this was Intuitive Machines' first attempt, their first mission to the moon, carrying our cargo. Now, I've talked about all the potential advantages of having industry do this for NASA. The industry had told us years ago that they thought they were technically ready to do it, that they thought if they specialized in doing it, that they could probably do it at less cost and much more frequently and much faster from initial order than NASA probably could, since we would normally build a custom spacecraft for every endeavor. And we've seen that so far in the progress that our CLPS vendors have made as they're working down to fly off their first missions. Intuitive Machines, though, however, in doing a soft touchdown on the moon has provided the first real evidence that this is possible to do. It's possible with today's technology, with dedicated engineering and appropriate financial management, to have a private company actually design a spacecraft, develop a mission, buy a rocket, and fly all the way to the moon and soft land on the surface of the moon. Not just in an area where we landed earlier, decades ago, near the equator with the Apollo missions, but in the unusual territory of the South Pole, which is the focus of our future human Artemis missions. This is a gigantic accomplishment. On this particular mission, we had the company bring 6 NASA science and technology experiments on board down to the lunar surface. They ranged to do studies in science, in looking at the electron density and plasma on the surface of the moon, technology studies such as measuring rocket plume impingement during landing, navigation studies on the way to the moon, down to the surface of the moon, laser ranging, fuel quantity, as other investigations. And interesting enough, when we started this, we had put together a list of different instruments and payloads that the Commercial Lunar Payload Services companies could volunteer to take down to the surface of the moon. And Intuitive Machines picked a complement of 5 payloads, which we later augmented with the radio frequency mass gauge fuel measurement experiment. And Intuitive Machines picked a number of payloads and experiments from NASA to bring down, which, as Steve brought out, greatly benefited them during the execution of their mission. So at this point today, as Intuitive Machines looks to make sure they understand the status of the Odysseus vehicle, we are already looking back at scientific and technological data that we accumulated during the transit out to the moon, during the deorbit operations, and we're looking forward to getting even more data as Intuitive Machines finishes the checkout of Odysseus. Now, in doing so, we knew at NASA, when we went out to gather this by commercial services, that we had these great potential benefits, but we also had risks. We knew, for example, no one had previously done this. We knew we were asking industry to do an incredibly difficult thing to do, to go from those high speeds of orbital velocity all the way down to the very slow speeds to get to a particular position on the moon where we wanted them to land. And Intuitive Machines' accomplishment for this actually shows everyone that this approach will work, and we look forward to using it over and over in the future. Nilofer?
Thank you so much, Joel. We'll now hand it over to Tim.
Thank you, Nilofer. Very excited to be here today. They told me to smile before the press conference, and I can't help but smile anyway because we landed on the moon. A little bit about Odysseus. Odysseus is a mostly autonomous vehicle. Our operations crew would monitor the vehicle during flight. We'd provide some trajectory updates and parameter updates, and that's what got us into lunar orbit. The lunar descent is different, though. During orbit, we would prepare for maneuvers, we'd watch the maneuver, and then know that we had time to recover afterwards and replan for the next stage. But lunar-powered descent is the end game. There is no after. You're either successful or you fail. And so the last rev around the moon, we buttoned up any last-minute changes we wanted on the vehicle, and there were a few that we may talk about today. And basically, the vehicle disappeared behind the far side of the moon. We had loss of signal for 25 minutes. Everybody got up and went to the bathroom. There was nothing to do but wait for the signal to come back on. It was amazing how quickly we adapted to continuous communications during transit, to regular losses of signal being a part of our life because we're circling the moon. Once we came up around the north pole of the moon, we were in polar orbit. The vehicle was completely autonomous. We watched as the onboard systems pointed our cameras to the moon. We processed over 10,000 images on board with our own machine learning algorithms to manage the speed of the vehicle. And the guidance system decided, based on the propulsion system, our available thrust levels, orbital velocity, and distance to the target near the South Pole, when the right time to turn the engines were. That's power descent initiation. And the engines came on approximately 13 minutes before landing. We were at full thrust for what we call braking 1. Basically, we were trying to slow down from approximately 3,600 miles per hour to something more like 30 miles per hour near the landing site. That's braking 1. The vehicle performed flawlessly. Our main engine thrust was good. Our thrust control was perfect. Engine performance has exceeded expectations in many ways. And flight control, my personal background, kept the vehicle pointed exactly where it was supposed to go for the entire burn. We monitored down until a pitch over event. So early in the trajectory, the vehicle is basically flying sideways with respect to the moon, and we're flying in one direction, and the engine is slowing us down to take that velocity out of the vehicle. Once we get within a kilometer of the landing site, however, the vehicle goes into what we call a pitch over, and this brings another set of cameras into alignment with the landing site. At that point, we lost comm, which we knew we would do because we switched from one set of antennas to another. And then we regained communications all the way until approximately 200 meters above the landing site. Then there was a tense moment where we did not have regular communications, but our dedicated radio and ground operations crew found the signal, and within an hour or so, we were getting the first data down from the surface of the moon. I could not be prouder of our operations team and our engineers for putting together Odysseus, which was a marvelous machine. And to look at the moon every night now and know that we have new hardware there that we had a hand in building in our lifetime, something I couldn't say before, it really was a magical day.